Okay. So we are back on the track, and talking about 1990s, that it was time of rebuilding the church, opening parishes throughout the Russia, and also through this time, the Russian church reached the next level, where people would not just the people who became church members, they already learn how to live church life, and they learn how to what is expected from an Orthodox Christian in spiritual sense, in practical sense. But now the next question came, how to survive in the church. So now the next question is about particular problems what church people face, what church family face. Why do people of clergy leave the church, for instance, and so on. So, and kind of it's time of maturity, whereas 1990s was time of to be a neophyte, right? And when a person is a neophyte, he really, how to say, is filled with energy, and it's comparable with marriage, right? So you're really excited and about your marriage and about your fiance, and sort of all life is ahead of you, and so, and it's the best thing that ever has ever happened to you. But I don't know how many people were able to carry on day in day out like that. So with such, I mean, because sort of level to be high, a person probably cannot be on high emotionally all the time. So you need to deal with various levels of your adrenaline, of your energy, of your emotions, and so on. And, and there is no sun every day, at least where we live here. And the same true for your church life, right? And from your readings of the first week and other similar ascetic readings, you learned that there is a desert, right? So there is time when person goes through the desert, and we see in 3 years Christ ministry this, that he felt abandoned at the end, alone, and had to overcome it. So, not mentioning that he went in the desert for 40 days in prayer. That's sort of our ideal right now for our great land. So, uh, and so after 1990s, those questions started to be discussed, and actually it just happens now, those years, that you see there is more and more clergy who openly speak about problems of church people, specific problems that church people deal, and so on. And it's becoming normal. It's not shocking. It's not something that, so kind of, if you are a church man, it means that you cannot have problem. You only can blame yourself. You only can say that, if you have problems, you don't pray to enough, or you don't have faith enough, and so on. That's sort of a response that person might receive in 1990s, if he would say that, I have ABC sets of problems, and response back that he might receive would be, well, because, I mean, you are not good enough, and then person would be on a guilt trip, sort of feeling, I'm not good enough, and then he would struggle more and more. But at the end of the day, he would remain unhappy. And we have great land, but same time, great land leads us to Pascha. Okay, we cannot have Pascha 12 months in a year, but we cannot have great land 12 months in a year either. So therefore, it's a sign that something goes on. There is something that maybe, as it was in the case of a baby who was blind, right? Remember, and the disciples approached the Lord with already prefabricated answer for him, So was it because of his fall or because of his parent? But the Lord retorted, neither. So we should be very careful in this case that there can be reasons of psychological nature, for instance, right? That the person is indecisive naturally. So, and he wants to outsource decision to somebody else, but as a result, he's unhappy. So those questions now become, they surface and people can speak about them. It's so look, for instance, there is an interview on the Eastern American Diocese website with Father Serafim Chemadakov, who is a practicing psychotherapist, and it's okay. So it's okay to discuss things like that. It doesn't mean that a priest is an answer. It's a part of your references for all your concerns, because there can be cases where you need to see a professional. There can be cases where priests should really realize, should understand his limitations, or cases where priests can even make damages. So, because after all, when a prayer of absolution is read, priest says, "I am only a witness. Christ himself is the one who absolves the sin, not the man." So this sort of conversation now entering church space more and more, and this is a sign of this evolution of church life, but still we are reaching the level of pre-revolutionary scholarship in many directions. For instance, regarding canon law, there are very few people in Russia who work in this field. So there are some names who are doing good job, but we haven't received, we haven't obtained anyone like Vladimir Benishevich, who was killed in 1938. So in 1942, I'm sorry, in 1992, there was a council in Kharkiv where Metropolitan Filaret, the first hierarch of the Russian of the church in Ukraine, of the Ukrainian church, right? I think he was an exarch of the patriarch. He actually, as at that time, right? There was this council. I mean, the Russian church at this council stood against Metropolitan Filaret, who refused to show obedience to the Russian church, and as a result, he founded his own church, and this church was recently recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 2018. So, but because he refused to show obedience to the Russian Church, being a bishop of the Russian Church, he was suspended, defrocked, and later even anathematized. Okay, so that was a big thing. That similarly as in the 1920s, in 1990s in the Russian Church, the Russian Church had to deal with a newly independent states of the Russian Empire. I mean, of the Soviet Union, of the former Russian Empire. And for instance, there hasn't been any problems, hopefully yet, in Belarus. So Belarus is part of the Russian Church. But in Ukraine, as you see, there is now the church that is recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarchate and is not recognized by many Orthodox churches, and most importantly, ignored by the Ukrainian church. The Ukrainian church, which is same way as the Russian church abroad, a self-governing church, remains the major church of the country. And now in Ukraine, they want to rename this church. They want to reapply the name of the Ukrainian church towards this newly recognized church. That this new so-called autocephalous church would be called Ukrainian church, and then the major church of the country, which is Ukrainian Autonomous Church, would be called the Russian Church. Okay. So, but I mean, political situation and conflict in Ukraine, and so and the case of Crimea, of course, they play very much into this. And in Estonia, there was restoration of the jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Estonia, and the state recognized this jurisdiction, and there finally was decision. But I mean, Estonia Ecumenical Patriarchate was before the war there. Russian Church didn't recognize, but sort of it was different case than Ukraine, and they didn't have anyone like the former Metropolitan Philaret who was an anathematized hierarch and so on, which made the situation even more complicated. So in Ukrainian church, I mean, in Estonia, both churches, the Russian church and the Ecumenical Patriarchate, were able to reach solution. And now there are two dioceses of both churches. They are not in very good talking terms, but still they coexist, and there is no open conflict between the two. In Lithuania, there is still 50 plus dioceses of the Russian Church, in the same way as before the World War II. There is single jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate, and Russians are really minority in Lithuania. Lithuania just gave all Russians who were there Lithuanian citizenship, unlike it was done in neighborhood Latvia, where Russians were very close to be half of the population, and Latvians were concerned about the fate of their country, because Russians were very much connected with Russia culturally. Latvians, they were concerned whether it would be possible that basically Russians would take over. So, but at the end of the day, there are also still single jurisdiction in Latvia. I mentioned Estonia, and I don't think there is any other issues elsewhere in the newly founded states after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, so So the Russian church also had to find the way of living, of cooperating with the state, right? And the state recognized validity of the Russian church, importance of the Russian church. So church is treated with respect. And I think for older generations, there are fewer and fewer people who lived all their lives during the Soviet time, both in the church and who were church people during the Soviet time, from their very birth. Uh, and for such, especially clergy, there are still some bishops who became bishops during the Soviet time. And I think for that generation, they still have somehow this fear, right? And fear is a very deep, very deep, profound notion connected with the Russian culture, in the sense that when your father was imprisoned, right? And or like I know a person whose father actually grew up in a prisoner camp, right? I guess it's very hard not to bear an impact of this. So, and when you were a second-class citizen as a priest in the Soviet Union, uh, not that second-class citizens was before the war, but still they would tax you heavily, right? There was very unjust, unjust taxation for clergy. And when you have to deal with representative of authorities who would dictate you what to do and basically would interfere with your church work, so you don't want this to come back. Okay, you don't want this ever happen again. And for me, this is one of the readings of the Russian church, or maybe particular steps in connection of defending itself against a possible coming back of the time when Russian church, when there will be attempts to put Russian church in a ghetto once again. And you can see actually moods. You can see that there is, like on the internet, there is very often like now, I mean, if not hostile, but negative mood toward the Russian church. Kind of, we don't need priests here, and church is there again. So there is sort of uh, uh, attitudes that picture Russian church as aggressive, intolerant body, and perhaps there are some of the people who act this way. But at the same time, I'm convinced that, God forbid, there are persecutions happened once again. There will be once again many new martyrs. And think about the Russian Imperial Church. Those people, they had salaries as bishops, and not bad salaries. They were part of the official dome. So every province would have uh, a governor, an imperial governor, and every province of the Russian Empire would have a bishop. So those governors, they disappeared, but bishops remained, and many of them, they became new martyrs. So they tried their very best to remain Christians until the very end. So why wouldn't I believe that this is not going to happen again with those people who are now perceived often uh, as living lavish lifestyles and so on. So uh, a question to remain to answer regard to what extent did Russian Church use opportunity that the 1990s provided her with. So that's Brat Ivan is going to do for me, because I kind of, I mean, I didn't have time to do this research, but that's interesting really to see exactly what opportunities were lost, and where we are right now. I don't know. I mean, to look at polls, and look at statistics, actually, to what extent people in Russia now trust the church, what is the level of authority the church enjoys. Uh, okay. Uh, so, but many amazing things also happened that were unthinkable for the previous time. If in the 1980s To have a Bible was a big deal. To have you can still buy a prayer book, yes, in church, but it cost you like, I mean, if somebody's monthly salary was 70 rubles, then you would pay for a prayer book, I think like 10 or 20 rubles. It was really a lot. But then explanation was that those money would go to support the church. So now there is plenty of literature that put out of business Jordanville. The Jordanville doesn't have to print anything in Russian because so everything is there in Russia. But I mean, at the same time, there's also amazing projects in Russia, like this ongoingly published reference Pravoslavная Encyclopedia, which is published in Moscow, and it has now 50 plus volumes, and they now work on the letter S. And so, and it's a project that was started before the revolution, but never was finished. And now they picked up and continue. That's as many other initiatives. They were interrupted, put on hold for 80 years of the Soviet regime, and now they resumed. So this is really amazing time in this sense. So, and as a result of the conversation between the newly elected Metropolitan Laurus, who was elected Metropolitan in 2001, and Metropolitan Laurus Vladika Laur, he sometimes when you read about him in contemporary sources from Russia, you may have an impression that he had an idea fix, that he really wanted to be a connector between two churches all his life. It was like his raison d'etre. But I'm not seeing him this way. I'm seeing him as a sensitive man, attentive to his mission, to his task. He really didn't want to be the first hierarch, that's for sure. That's for sure. That it was to some extent comparable with Patriarch Tikhon's role, because Metropolitan Vitaly, his predecessor, whom he knew all his life and who actually took him away from the monastery in Ladomirova when Brotherhood left in the view of the approaching Soviet army. So he kind of respected him a lot. And Metropolitan Vitaly, he was born in 1910. So he was over 19 years old, and he decided to step down, but then he changed his mind. And of course, an issue of possible negotiations with Moscow Patriarchate was sort of underlying all this, because there were strong feelings of many that now the Russian Church abroad will enter into negotiations with Moscow Patriarchate, and the Russian Church abroad would be lost, the Russian Church abroad would be taken over, and so on. The Russian Church abroad would betray its identity, and so on. And Metropolitan Vitaly, he initially decided to step down, and then he kind of decided not to abdicate, to come back, and he put Metropolitan Laurus in very difficult situations, psychological and otherwise. I mean, practical. So therefore, he didn't really want this job. He didn't want the job. But when he became a metropolitan, he started to consider those options, those possibilities of having conversation with Moscow, starting to meet with them. So basically, he decided to do what Metropolitan Vitaly refused to do, because Metropolitan Vitaly, he didn't want any conversations. So he would probably accept a letter of repentance and so on if he would be invited, in the sense that the bishops of Moscow Patriarchate would repent. But other than that, he was a person of monologue rather than dialogue. And Vladika he was different. So personality also plays a role. Psychological profile plays an important role in studying history. And conversation started in 2003 at fall. There was all unprecedented all diaspora conference of clergymen. So all clergymen, all priests, I guess in deacons of the Russian Church abroad, were invited to come to Nayak to discuss the future of the Russian Church abroad. So since it hasn't been done before, there were a lot of patience, a lot of heated attitudes. And also, interestingly, I believe it was Father Maxim Kozlov from Moscow who was there. Then he mentioned people from Russian Church abroad, they don't know their own history. So, because many of us operate with mythologies. And what I mean by mythology is that how things perceived. But when you start to trace them down, you actually see that facts don't support this particular representation of history. So, and those things were very good. And there was a commission established of the Russian Church abroad for negotiations with Moscow Patriarchate. And Father Luke was part of this and participating in all meetings. And they resulted in the restoration of communion on the day of Ascension in 2007 in precisely the same cathedral that was so dear for Russian Church abroad, Christ Savior Cathedral. And I was mentioning about the Council of 2000, is the year 2000, and I should have said that this council became a turning point because there was the basis of social concept of social doctrine adopted, and they have a special provision there that in case of when the state requires something that contradicts Christian conscience at the extreme measure, church could call to civil disobedience. So, and that was big deal, and new martyrs were canonized at the same council, right? This document, basis of social doctrine, was produced as a result of also commission's work. But Russian Church abroad didn't participate, but the future Patriarch Kirill was in charge of this draft process. And interestingly, he collected people with very different worldviews. And he succeeded as a moderator because he would ask, thank you very much for your opinion, but do you believe this way because of your personal preferences or because you can back it up by point of reference in church tradition? That was sort of common ground, common denominator in decision-making process. And as a result, people who were very different, who in their life actually wouldn't talk to each other sometimes because they were so polar. Nevertheless, but all of them were united in their membership in the church. and they succeeded in producing these documents that you, I'm sure, study in your other classes. And it's still very, very useful, very successful document, because sometimes there are documents that are stillborn, they are dead, right? They are unsuccessful, but this one is successful. It's a result of successful documents that really kind of positively represent the Russian Church elsewhere, because I think the Ecumenical Patriarchate only recently started to work on something like that, or produce something like that. But sort of Russian Church was really ahead of many other Orthodox churches in this direction. Okay, so I rest my case here, and